Adam Whitty. Welcome back to Build Your Authority.
Joe Barnabia.
Good to see you again, Adam. And I know Don Yeager was very jealous that he didn't get that introduction at the top for episode 1, but you were nice enough to throw him a bone later in the show. And speaking of the great Don Yeager, we forgot to mention that he's a really good blogger. Like exceptionally, like almost like I'm making a joke out of it. He's like the #1 most read blog on Forbes. Like he's an amazing individual. So this episode is going to be about blogging. So first of all, if Don is watching us, sorry for not mentioning that, but we had a really deep dive into his books and speaking and stuff like that. But Adam, today it's all about blogging.
Yeah, and listen, this is one of those topics where for some it isn't sexy, right? Writing a book is sexy. Being a keynote speaker is sexy and fun. Blogging for some is like, oh, do I have to do that? But what our listeners and viewers will learn in today's episode is that all of the hard work that builds your relevance and authority online, it all comes, or much of it comes, through the power of blogging. And so what we're going to talk about today, and it's great because I see Mark, nodding his head, like this is the hard yet really important stuff to building your authority.
Awesome. And without further ado, his name is Mark Gillespie. He's the director of content at Forbes Books at the Authority Company. Mark, welcome. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Joe, Adam?
We are awesome. And we're so happy to have you today because blogging is your thing. Like that is your main, you wake up and eat breakfast of blogging. But before we get there, and Mark, you know me well enough, I like to keep things simple. What's a blog in terms of length? I think that's one of the things where people like, is it going to be 100 words, 200 words, 700 words? Let's start with basics. What makes up the right amount of words for a blog?
Let me put it a different way. A blog is a nice break in the middle of the day. A book is an experience. When we talk about sitting down with a book, we talk about sitting down. We make time for it. We settle into a chair. We make a cup of coffee or something else. And we spend time sitting with somebody else's opinion. And that's wonderful. But most people don't have time every day, every evening to do that. So blogging kind of slips into your life when you least expect it and gives you something to do in between the other things that you're doing.
But give me numbers, Mark, because I think business people are watching this. They want hard tax, right, Adam? We want numbers. We want pie graphs. We want all of that. What is the optimal length for a blog these days?
Optimal length is anywhere from 800 all the way up to about 2,000 words. So between 1.5 and 3 sheets of paper, it should be about a 5 to 10 minute read.
Okay.
And Joe, a little bit of history for you. Mark's going to correct me if I'm wrong here, but the name blog actually comes from the original phrase of a web log. And it was this idea that, you were online, you were on the web, and you were like logging things, right? It could be your experiences traveling around the world. It could be your experiences writing a book, right? But that's where the word blog comes from, web log. And, today, as Don Yeager, the guest on our first episode of season 2 said, look, I can write 1, maybe 2 books a year, but every single week I write a blog for Forbes.com, and that's what keeps me relevant.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a powerful idea.
Yeah. Also, too, that I find, Adam, with my blog, which is probably read not as often as Don Yeager's blog, is the cadence and creativity. Like giving yourself a mission every week to come up with content. And, my years of working in radio where I had 4 hours every day, 5 days a week to create content, I had the impetus to do that. So in a way, it helps me always find something to look for, because I think that's the one thing people always struggle with, Adam, and Mark will get into this too, is like, what am I going to talk about today? What am I going to write about today? But if you get into the cadence of knowing that you have to write something, your ears are perked up. You're definitely like a dog who's ready to pounce on something. So that cadence, I think, is super important for a lot of creatives. Don't you agree, Adam?
Oh, I completely agree. And I will add, for many of our entrepreneurs and CEOs that are listening or watching, not to worry. Just like a book, if you don't have the desire to author the blog, write the words yourself, of course, we have a wonderful team here at Advantage that partners with you to help you turn your ideas into great blogs. And obviously, that's what Mark and his fabulous team do for so many of our members. But Mark, let's jump in for a start here, and let's start with this idea that you've got an extensive background in journalism yourself, and you've created content most of your professional career. So how has this experience really kind of shaped your approach to blogging as a tool for the purpose of building your authority as a leader?
Yeah, and thanks for pointing out the extensive experience. You can tell every year is somewhere in this chin. Yeah, my experience goes back before blogging. I started out in newspapers, public radio, and bloggers tend to occupy the same space in the media ecosystem as the op-ed writers did in a newspaper, as the commentator did on the radio. So these are people who have opinions based on what's going on in the world. And they provide the color that goes around the facts that we're searching for. And blogging became a way for people to use freely accessible or cheap technology platforms to do it themselves, to put themselves out there as an expert in something. And it didn't even really matter what it was. It could be toy soldiers from the 19th century. But you would find your niche and you would regularly interact with a fan base that had shared interests. Now, blogging really got started kind of in the dark ages of the internet. Do you remember that funky, hippie publication called the Whole Earth Catalog from the 70s?
No, I've
Oh,
heard of it.
gosh. Okay, so the Whole Earth Catalog was this idea was it would showcase interesting products that, I don't know, you would want to take with you to a Grateful Dead concert. But the reason I'm bringing that up is the owner of the Whole Earth catalog started a web portal called the Whole Earth Electronic Link, which is the well. And that's like where the early blogs got started. Like all these people would come in, form communities, and this is like in 1986, and just chat and build up a community around it. Now, fast forward 40 years, here we are in the world of data-driven blogging, where everything has to get search engine results. Everything has to be hyper-focused on a target audience of people you've never met before. But still, the beating heart of blogging is your willingness to share your expertise and connect with an audience of like-minded people.
And in terms of building thought leadership, I think Adam mentioned the top folks that may be interested in working with us don't have the time to do it. So how does your team help sort of become the magic hand that crafts this content for our leaders to build their authority? How does that work? Because I think people will be like, with a book, I get the idea. It's I'll probably have a ghostwriter, or I'll maybe write some stuff and then send it off. How does the collaborative process work between our content team and people that want to work with us when it comes to blogging?
Well, we handle blogging a little bit differently than you described. It's not waking up on a Thursday and saying, "What am I going to be writing about today?" What we do is we set up a calendar and a plan, and we like to watch how articles link to each other and support each other. Because one of the things that Google rewards bloggers for is creating almost like a fishing net of topics, so that when people are looking for one topic, there's another article that reinforces it. We also look outside of a blog for other opportunities to link to that author's thought leadership. Like, for instance, if somebody does an exceptional podcast, we might put a blog together about the podcast and link back to the original source. So it's not only about strategically expressing yourself in a way that you think an audience might be interested in, but also creating connections between your own work and other people's work in a way that shows your relevance to the rest of the world.
Joe, one of the things that Mark shared that I think is really important and it's worth mentioning and reinforcing for our listeners and viewers is this idea that a blog as it started, as Mark described, was really kind of the color commentary. It was kind of the editorial, the op-ed to what was going on in the world or what was going on in an industry or in a specific community. So it was very opinion based. And for our CEOs and entrepreneurs that have a blog or are considering creating a blog as a tool to help them build their authority, it's still very much that this is a forum for you to take your experience, to take your background and everything that you know, and apply that to maybe things that are happening in the world with your spin, with your op-ed attached to that, and share your perspective, right? And so it's not hard, right? I mean, if I talk to a CEO and say, "Hey, what's your opinion on this?" Very rarely do I get a blank stare and no answer. Usually I need to ask them to move on in the conversation because they have that much that they want to share when it comes to their opinion or their take on something, whether that's a business issue, a leadership issue, an issue of something that's happening in the world writ large. So I just want to make the point that I think is very important for those that are listening and watching is that, look, this is your color commentary on things that are happening in the world. This is not something that's hard, right? This is not something where I think you're going to rack your brain for hours saying, "Oh my God, what do I write about? Oh my gosh, what do I say?" This is you commenting on things that you already have very hardened opinions or views on, or a set of experiences that can dovetail well with a news item or a business item or something that might be happening in your industry. This is something that is I think very easy for most people to do.
And a callback to season 1, Adam, was when we had David Meerman Scott on and we talked about newsjacking. And
Yep.
in a way, this kind of dovetails perfectly, Mark. So talk about newsjacking and blogs. How can people's opinions, like Adam mentioned, work into trying to comment on the news and when to do it? Unpeel that a little bit for us.
Well, it's important to, first of all, keep up with the news, watch it, make sure that you form an opinion that's good about it, not just a reactive opinion, but one based on your framework of thought. And then try to insert yourself in the conversation. So you're posting a blog, you're pushing it out onto LinkedIn, Facebook, other places where people are receiving news headlines. And so your voice becomes part of the broader conversation. It's important to pay attention to making sure that you ethically represent what's going on, make sure that you're talking to both sides, that you're offering something specific and unique. And then when you're doing the newsjacking, you not only get that boost of readership at the beginning, but it also gives you a unique way to bridge back into your own other blog articles. It gives you a way to kind of insert yourself and win followers and then build that audience. The danger of newsjacking, and this is something I'm always warning about in blogging, is you don't control when somebody reads an article. So it's always important to use those newsjacking opportunities wisely and focus also on what we call evergreen content. And evergreen content is right for the season. It's always green. It's always ready to go. You want to make sure that the core of your content is useful to people no matter when they access it.
Mark, before we dig deeper, a couple of kind of call them base essential questions. So if I'm a CEO or I'm an entrepreneur and I'm like, okay, I need to do a blog. My first question is, where should that blog live? Should that blog live on my company's website? Should that blog live on my personal brand website? Or should I just, have that blog hosted on LinkedIn, right? Should I just write long form posts on LinkedIn and publish it there? Where should I publish my blog?
Well, let's rule one out, not your company website.
Okay.
Your company website expresses the brand personality of your company, and that's going to get mixed up in your own persona. Then your next choice is absolutely on your personal brand website. You want to own your content, you want to be able to control it, and you want to make sure that it has a primary home. After you've published it there, I also recommend that you go to wherever you're going to find your audience. So LinkedIn is a great place to go because it has a blogging function called newsletter, and you can share that newsletter with all of your followers as soon as you publish. But be sure to open a link at the top, a little sentence that says, "This first appeared at this website," and link back, because that tells Google that this isn't the original content. And Google will go back and give you credit for what you put on your website, not what was on LinkedIn. LinkedIn does like it when you can kind of keep people on the property. So when people are on LinkedIn and then they click over to your blog, they can read the whole thing and they don't have to click through a link someplace else. So that kind of is the best of both worlds. You get the initial credit from Google for publishing it on your website, and then LinkedIn gives you kudos for making it available right away. There is another emerging platform called Substack, which interestingly is a blog, an email platform, and a podcasting platform all wrapped up in one. Now, it's a little bit technical, and it's something to just nose around on. LinkedIn is a lot easier, but if you want to kind of investigate the benefits of Substack, that is an emerging platform that's becoming very popular among bloggers.
Are there benefits to blogging everywhere? You mentioned Substack. Another one is Medium. You have LinkedIn. You have your website. Outside of the grunt work involved in doing so, are there benefits to being everywhere, or just isolating it to certain platforms that you're used to working on?
It depends on your audience. I would imagine most of the people that are listening don't have a big Substack audience yet, so LinkedIn's probably preferable. I mean, look at LinkedIn. If you've got 28 followers on LinkedIn, probably don't go there. If you've got 1,000 followers and you've got people that you can reach out to, then you have a built-in audience that you should be sharing your content with. So do double post there.
The next question, Mark, just in terms of bases, would be, okay, I know where I should blog. We know how long that blog should be, how many words. How often do I do it?
I would say at least once a week.
Okay.
That's what I would suggest. It's all a top of mind game. You want people to remember you and look forward to you. So the more often you blog, the better. If you're out there once a day, that's wonderful. But most people don't have the time and energy to do once a day. So I would try to keep to a cadence that keeps you in the top of the mind for people. Now, if you're working with a ghostwriter, it might be less frequent, but you should be trying to find a way to put your presence out there so that people don't forget you before the next time they see you. Because remember, we're all inundated by hundreds and hundreds of messages every day, and we want to stand out among that flood of information.
Yeah, so as a leader, I always use the term aggressive but realistic. So I'm hearing you say, I think for most of our listeners and viewers, aggressive but realistic is probably once a week or maybe once every other week. I think I'm hearing you say, Mark, if you're not blogging at least a couple of times a month, then you're not really blogging.
Right, exactly. And circling back to the point on LinkedIn, once you've published on your personal brand website, that does not guarantee people are going to read it. You also need to build in time to promote what you're doing on your social media, in the email chains that you participate in, anywhere else. You've got to be able to connect with other people so that your audience is aware that you exist.
Mhm. And we probably should get into the SEO of it. You mentioned it earlier. Outside of LinkedIn, you really have
Yeah.
not much control with SEO. But when you're blogging on your personal website, tell us about this mysterious world of search engine optimization, Mark, and how it fits in with blogging.
Right. So search engine optimization, first of all, is not the magic bullet. It's one of several things you should be paying attention to. So let's get that out of the way. There's no magic dust that you can sprinkle on your article and suddenly it's going to get you good SEO. The best way to understand SEO is to search up Google's People First Content Standards.
Hmm.
They have a formula called Double EAT. What they're looking for is expertise, experience, authority, and timeliness. So they want to make sure that what you're publishing is serving audiences in a useful way. Google is not interested in you writing content so that robots can scrape it. And if you've got enough articles on your website, suddenly you're going to get better rankings. What they're more interested in is that you authentically express an opinion that can't be found anywhere else, that you're organized and well researched and factual, and that what you're presenting is something people actually want and need to read. And it's an extensive set of guidelines. Now, what happens is if you're a good player in the space and you're providing things that are unique to you and also sought after by readers, then Google will give you better ranking. So your story will rise a little bit higher on the search engine based on how well you're meeting its algorithm. Now, if you do very well, you get something called a search engine results page feature. That could be something called a snippet, where it puts you at the top and puts a star next to your article. It could be a mention in an AI overview summary. There's a couple of other things. It could give you a rich listing, so your article you can actually see the frequently asked questions structure inside your article and all that stuff. So Google has ways of giving you gold stars if you do very well. And if you get a search engine feature, go out and celebrate, because it's hard to earn.
Mark, you have a little bit of a formula of what are the elements that make a blog post truly impactful in building your authority. Would you share that formula with our listeners and viewers?
Absolutely. I call it SMART writing, SMART. Now, we're all familiar with SMART goals: specific, meaningful, I forget the A, but you know it. I mean, you can look it up. But I tried to create something that's easy to remember. Smart writing is specific, which means it needs to address very certain things. It can't be too high level. It's got to drill down. It's got to be meaningful, and that's an audience response. It's got to connect with your audience in a way that's emotional and personal. It's got to be authoritative. And what that means is you are the right person to be delivering this message. Of all the people in the world, the way that you express yourself and the examples that you choose resonate. It's got to be relevant. It can't come out of left field. It can't kind of be too high level and technical. It's got to be something that people want to read and can put to use right away. And then, of course, the last one is timely. It can't be something that feels stale. You can't write an article about something that Ronald Reagan did during his unless you're writing a history blog, and then it falls under relevant. So timeliness, like, oh my God, this is exactly what I needed right now. So it's not about creating it just in time for Thanksgiving, your turkey recipe. It's about making sure that there's something there so that when people encounter it, they're able to apply it to their lives right away.
That's good stuff. I equate it to I stole David Meerman Scott's thing about newsjacking. I call it life jacking, because sometimes
Yeah.
a lot of people have great life stories, but how do they segue that into a blog? And usually what I do is I find a current story that ties into something that happened in my career. So for example, recently there was a big Netflix show, Nobody Wants This. And there was this big backstory about the creator of the show had two options when she was pitching the show to Netflix. Either it goes on Netflix with Kristen Bell as the star, or the creator wants to be the star and Netflix doesn't take the show. So she decided to, for the good of the show, to not be the star and let Kristen Bell be in it, and she became the show became a huge hit. And I decided to tie that into my early radio career, where I was a behind the scenes producer, and I wasn't getting all the glory of the host and everything, but I was putting the show above my ego. So I was able to tie in something that happened in my life, dozens of years ago, to something that's currently happening. So if you're always looking for ideas of how, say you have great stories to bring up, but like Mark, you mentioned, if you mention them out of the blue, it makes no sense. But if you're able to tie it into something in the present tense, that's a great way to connect content that's not only factual in the news, but also pretty personal.
Absolutely. I like to say I've got a face for radio. So this kind of forum is, it's not comfortable for me to be on camera like this. And I would say, if we zoom out and we consider blogging of all the other things that you can do what feels most comfortable to you. Do the thing where you're in your skin and you feel like you can project out exactly what you want. I'm a better writer than I am a speaker. And so when I get behind the keyboard, I really sing and come to life. And so blogging is a perfect medium for me. Podcasting is not so much a perfect medium for me. So I would gravitate toward that just because it feels right when I do it. So I would say, as Joe pointed out, don't force yourself to do something that you're not going to do well.
And if you are going to do it, but it isn't your forte, work with a professional.
Exactly.
Mark, let's talk about kind of this balance of content. So I'm going to write a blog. That blog's going to live at adamwitty.com. I'm going to post once a week. It's going to be 800 to 1,000 words. We know that it's a bit of color commentary, editorializing on maybe what's happening in the world. Maybe it's me talking about things happening in my industry. Maybe it's me talking about things in my business. Maybe it's me talking about my life and my two small boys. What is the balance that professionals should think about when it comes with storytelling versus industry insights into inside baseball within their industry? Like, help our listeners and viewers understand what kinds of things should they be blogging about, and is there like a mixture or a ratio of the types of content that they should be posting?
Well, I'm a big believer in this old marketing adage that it's better to say one thing 100 times than 100 different things. So you got to decide what's the underlying theme of what you're trying to get out. What is the message that you're trying to convey? And then every story that you tell ties back to that message. So if you're talking about your kids, what you're doing is actually telling a story about leadership. If you are talking about a movie that you saw, what you're actually doing is talking about how those characters relate to a work culture thing that you care about. So at all points, you're doing variation on a theme. And so the balance is this: you've got to make it clear why you're telling the story, and then you need to be free to be creative. So if what you want to do is tell parables that people have to figure out, then make sure you know what the answer is at the end. Make sure that it's not so obscure that it's driving toward a point that other people are going to have to puzzle. So you do have to show your hand early in the game. Um, and then also, I would say in this balance, do not just simply present organized frameworks of thought. The professor mode isn't something that people are necessarily going to respond to right away. There is an exception, and this is one of my favorite examples. Um, I'm playing around with the idea that there's a difference between content and story. Sometimes people want content and sometimes people want story, and you shouldn't value one over the other. Now, I think that blogging is all about storytelling. I think you need to take an audience on a journey. It's more important that people read to the end than it is for them to click through in the first place. So when somebody comes to your article, you want them to show in Google that nice 3 or 4 minute time on page statistic. But then there are times when people just want content, and this is the example. How many times have you searched for a great recipe like cranberry tart for Thanksgiving, and the first thing you read is an 800-word blog article about grandma? And you're scrolling past the ads. What you want is not the story. What you want is the content at the end. It's the helpful information right away. So there needs to be a balance, I think, between how helpful you are and organized you are, and how interesting and engaging you are. The anecdotes, the stories, the examples that don't necessarily present themselves up front in the way that SEO dictates that we do.
That sounds hard, Mark.
It is. It's a balancing act. It's juggling.
Cool. And Mark, you often call blogging a anchor content.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Anchor content is an event that you promote. And of the things that our company does, anchor content is podcasting or blogging, and the books, of course. And then the rest of the content that you're producing directs people back to the anchor content. Now, what makes blogging interesting is that it's a nice fixed point in time, and it can derive from other content. So I advise people, for instance, who are doing podcasting and blogging to consider the podcast as the anchor content and the blog as the promotional content. So it's fairly easy to go in and create a more organized version of the podcast. And we're talking about a lot of different things on this podcast. This represents possibly 4 or 5 blogs. So what's your core content? What's your derivative content? Get that straight in your content plan and move forward accordingly.
And Joe, I think I'm hearing Mark say anybody that has a podcast should turn the content from their podcast into a blog. So if you're putting the time and energy and calories into creating your own podcast, not having a blog as well is just a missed opportunity.
Absolutely.
And I want to bring back Dave Merriman Scott again, Adam, because you remember on that episode when we talked about, I think it was authority building, but he talked about how his blogs, he used them to become chapters in a book. Like he used the cadence of writing a blog every week, and then each of those blogs became a chapter in a book. So if you don't have a book in you, for lack of a better phrase, a blog is a great way to start to then segue. And Mark, you've probably seen that with a lot of the authors we work with, starting with their journey as an author, as a blogger first, and then weaving a lot of that content into book form.
Yeah, I think of blogging as the warm-up exercises that you do before the big race. So it's not so much I'm writing a chapter a week, because a book is an organized experience. Yeah, chapter 1 has to be read before chapter 2 can be understood. Whereas a blog is a more random experience. People might jump in the middle, and they need to get just as much value from reading that blog as they did from reading the first one. And so I would say more specifically, I think of blogging as practice writing. It's like somebody in a symphony orchestra going into a practice room and learning their part. And then they come out and they put the whole thing together. Now, a skilled book planner is going to be able to look at 15, 20, 30 blogs and break it down into logical book chapters and organize things. And I would say probably 50 or 60% of what you write into a blog is going to be useful, but it's going to have to be reorganized.
That's good.
Yeah, I've heard it called blooking.
Yes.
which is creating a blog that ultimately you can use as a starting point for a book. So for those of us that have a hard time conceptualizing the mountain of creating a book, starting with a blog might be the right place to begin your journey.
Mark, I know PR is not your bag, but tell me about the connection of PR and blogs. How does that play a role?
Well, a PR representative is going to be trying to contact editors, producers, and other people in the media, the gatekeepers, and convince them that what you have to say as a thought leader is worth publicizing. So if you want to get into a newspaper, a magazine, on a morning show, or a podcast like this one, you have to convince a gatekeeper that what you have to say is worthwhile. Now, if that gatekeeper is interested in you, they're going to Google you. They're going to go to your website. They're going to try to figure out what you're all about. And guess what? If you're keeping a blog, all of a sudden they have dozens and dozens of examples of how you write. If you have a podcast, they have dozens and dozens of examples of what you sound like and what you look like on camera. So blogging provides personal brand evidence that can support a PR campaign.
I just want to reinforce that blogging for many is not sexy. It's kind of like going to the gym, right? If you want to have a great physique, going to the gym at 6 a.m. when it's 30 degrees outside isn't a whole lot of fun. It's not the sexiest thing to do. But if you want to have the beach body come summertime, you've got to put in the work. And I use that analogy because I think blogging is the gym for building authority, right? The best way to build authority is to be relevant online. Everybody knows that the first place that people go when they hear your name is to Google. And they want to find out, who are you? What does this person know? What have they done? And if you go to Google and you're a ghost, you're done. You're through before it's even begun. And so when you create a blog and create good content that's shared online, it creates incredible relevance. It also creates an incredible digital footprint for you online, which fundamentally builds your authority and creates a foundation in which all of these other things can then be stacked upon, whether it's a book or whether it's speaking or whether it's getting that feature public relations opportunity on TV or in a newspaper or magazine. Um, but yeah, blogging is like really foundationally important to building authority. And I don't think I can stress that enough.
So, Mark, we'll give you the final word here. Someone who wants to build their authority, they're watching this. They're watching it for a reason because they want to build their authority. What's first steps when it comes to blog?
First steps is the plan. What's your core message? What are the 4 or 5 things that you want to express? Who are you trying to talk to? What's your target audience? How are you going to get the word out? Is it through your website? Is it through your LinkedIn? Is it on Substack or someplace else? How do people find you? What is the method that you promote yourself? How do people who you don't know personally become aware of you? And you might need to reference your blog in other places. And then finally, sit down with your calendar, figure out what each topic's going to be every time, have that planned out. How do they link to each other? Don't think of it as a linear stream, but think of it as a concrete plan. What are the 20 or 30 things that you're going to be writing about this year? Put them into a calendar and then hold yourself accountable to that calendar, one after the other. Don't wake up on a Tuesday and say, oh my goodness, I have to write something today, and figure it out. Have a plan in place before you start.
Awesome. Mark, if folks wanted to find out more about you, connect with you, where should they start?
Thank you for this. You can go to my LinkedIn profile, That Gillespie, and look for my blog, which is called Human Words.
Awesome. Mark, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Adam, that wraps up episode 2 of Build Your Authority Season 2. So blogging and books so far, we have so much more to get to this season, but what are your takeaways after hearing Mark's words there, like in terms of the idea? I mean, I love the gym metaphor. That's so great. I mean, that's gonna make a great social media clip. I'll break the third wall here. That's definitely good. That's a definite takeaway. But blogs, you mentioned the fact that it's not sexy at first, but man, the dividends it pays off is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and look, if sitting down and writing isn't your cup of tea, then partner with a writer that can take your ideas, can take your opinions and viewpoints on different topics, and turn that into a beautiful 800, 1,000 word blog post. What Mark is saying is not you have to do this yourself. What Mark is saying is if you want to build authority, blogging is a fundamental ingredient in helping you achieve success.
Awesome. Adam, that'll do it for this week. I will see you next time. Thank you, sir.
Over and out.